In 1925, four men, T.M. Ellis, James Hurst, Charles McIntosh, and Willard von Mader, formed Rockford Enterprises. Their intention was to build the largest, most beautiful theater in Illinois. In 1927, they did. The 1920s were an unprecedented time of wealth in the United States. The rise of automobiles, radio, and the film industry led to a uniquely American spectacle called the Movie Palace. The Movie Palace was designed to take patrons away to another time and place. The cheapest and most popular style was the atmospheric style, pioneered by John Eberson, which featured a simple ceiling that was made to appear as an outdoor garden.
I think John Eberson was a character and a half. He created himself. He created the whole idea of atmospheric movie theaters, and he was the best publicist for the type of thing going on that of any of the architects. Now the Rapp brothers are quoted about saying, see the tired shop girl come into our movie palaces and escape into a dream world of palaces and finery and whatnot, and the democracy of all of this. Well, that's wonderful PR, but I think Eberson topped them even. When he told the story, the Avalon Theater that I'm seated in here, he said, oh, the inspiration for the Avalon. Oh, yes, I was in a bazaar, not in a store, not in an antique shop. I was in a bazaar in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I found Aladdin's lamp, and it inspired me to design the Persian-inspired Avalon Theater. He was as flamboyant as his theaters.
The theaters also varied in theme, from Moorish, Egyptian, and French. The Rapp brothers were known for their French movie palaces.
C.W. and George Rapp, the Chicago Rapps, had a modest office and some success. I'll cite again the Ringling Baraboo, the Central Park, and so on, were more ornate than their earlier works. One of the Rapps, and at the moment I forget which one, I think it was George, married a gal in the office. George and C.W. and the bride went on a honeymoon to France. They studied architecture there, which would be the most sensible thing to do, if not Italy, certainly France, and they had tickets to return on the Titanic. Mary said, let's wait and study the Paris Opera Building a little more. So they did. So they missed the Titanic. They studied the Paris Opera and came back and started throwing French at the American public.
The Movie Palace was a big hit in the 20s, but 1929 marked the end of a decadent era.
We know that there are about 225 renovated theaters in the United States that we have records on. There might be a few more, a few less, but we know that most of those are buildings from the 1920s that would probably fit under the classification of what people commonly think of as movie palaces. Now, at the end of the 1920s, at the height of the boom that had occurred in the 20s, there were 20,000 operating theaters in the United States. of every size. I mean, ranging from 200-seat Nickelodeon-style remnants, single storefronts, to movie palaces of 4,000 or 5,000 seats.
The Schumann Piano Company, makers of one of the finest pianos in the world, was presided over by Willard von Mader Sr. The pianos were sold in record numbers, and in 1904, every piano that came off the line was already spoken for. After 30 years in the piano business, Van Mader Sr. turned the company over to his son, who had worked his way up from the factory floor. Willard von Mader Jr. was a quiet, unassuming man who had a head for business.
In a way, he was a bit of an introvert, and in other ways he was an extrovert, you know. But he was just an ordinary fella that he just didn't exploit himself. He would rather exploit somebody else.
In the 1920s, the piano business lost popularity as radio became the predominant form of entertainment in the American home. Mr. Van Mader did everything possible to keep the Schumann Piano Company in operation. He diversified into furniture and toys and manufactured the popular Go Pony. With piano sales waning, Willard von Mader encouraged his partners in the Rockford Enterprises Group to purchase the Orpheum in Rockford, the Colonial in Galesburg, and the Avon Theater in Decatur. Charles McIntosh, head of sales for Schumann, suggested that the men open a series of funeral parlors, an enterprise that would always be needed. In 1925, after losing large sums of money in the piano business, the Rockford Enterprises Group set out to build the Coronado Theater. These four men sold bonds, took out mortgages on their homes and properties, and risked their entire financial futures to build a grand atmospheric theater in Rockford.
He lost the piano company that he had, and he said he would never be poor again.
He was a good guy. You know, I mean, people that I have met that knew Klein told me that they would liken him to the absent-minded professor, okay? That he might get on the streetcar downtown to come up here to a meeting at Bradley University and end up totally someplace else because he was so wrapped up in something he was thinking about, or, you know, that type of thing, that he would get lost. The older architects around here, you'll remember him very fondly.
Frederick Klein, an architect from Peoria, Illinois, was commissioned to design the Coronado Theater in 1925. A veteran architect, he was responsible for several theaters in the Peoria area, including the Duchess, the Madison, the Hippodrome, and the Apollo. In addition to these theaters, Klein was the predominant architect for many of the finer homes and public buildings in the Peoria area. The demand for Klein's work was so great that he published a book featuring the many styles to choose from.
Most of the things he did around here were pretty eclectic in style. Some of the ones that are best known today would be Peoria High School. You know, it's still used as a school, and you know, has a big impact on the community. The Madison Theater, that's downtown, although no longer used as a motion picture theater, it still houses live performances of music, mostly for younger people.
In 1925, Klein received one of his largest projects. He was commissioned to design the Coronado Theater.
The early movie palaces might be more true to style, accurate French details copied from the Paris Opera, or from design books that were widely published of particular pieces of ornament of whatever taste. By the late 1920s, many of these details were available in catalog, and if your agenda was to please the entrepreneur who was paying for the building and tempt the public, you might well just grab a bunch of details and apply them casually over a structure. The Coronado has many details that are found exactly in other earlier theaters. They came out of a catalog. It's very inventive. The style of atmospheric theater that the Coronado was marketed heavily by John Eberson. The asymmetrical style of the building is absolutely Eberson's taste of doing things. But Eberson cost more money. A lot of people copied Eberson because Eberson's style was less costly than Rapp's. The atmospheric ceiling cut your costs by about 25%.
The construction of the theater was plagued with minor problems. The building had to be shortened to provide a buffer zone between the Coronado and the existing Rockford Theater down the street. The original plans called for a larger staircase and a mural on the lobby wall. The staircase was shortened, and the mural was replaced with a 30-foot mirror to create an illusion of space. In the weeks prior to the opening, as the management was busy planning the grand opening extravaganza, the workers were frantically trying to complete the Coronado. Workmen had to work double shifts before the opening, as the elevators still had to be installed to raise and lower the organ and the orchestra pit. Sulfur burns in the carpeting had to be repaired, and the scaffolding had to be removed from the balcony. Even with all these problems, as well as labor disputes, the Coronado overcame its obstacles and was ready for the Rockford area on October 9th, 1927. The theater and Frederick Klein were a success, but Klein's business could not escape Black Tuesday.
He's gone from, the 1926 to 1928 or 29 era, designing the Coronado, which had a pretty big budget, so he should have made a nice fee off of that project. To just a few years later, not being able to pay the office rent.
They lived in the apartment up above the theater. What they had done was taken two of the smaller apartments and made it into one. And their apartment was, it must have been 50 years ahead of its time. It was a beautiful apartment.
As construction of the theater came to a close in 1927, the Van Maters moved from their residence on Harlem Boulevard to an apartment inside the Coronado. Originally, there were to be 18 studio apartments along the Main Street side of the building. A few of these apartments have been restored and are used in the newly renovated theater as star dressing rooms. Mrs. Van Mater was not known for her cooking skills, so the couple frequently dined at Schramm's restaurant, located inside the Lafayette Hotel. The Lafayette was designed in the Art Deco and Art Moderne styles by architect Edward Paul Lewin. The Van Maters asked Lewin to design their apartment inside the theater. To build the Art Deco apartment, Lewin combined two of the original efficiency apartments, leaving the Coronado with 16. For 6 months each year, the Van Maters traveled to California for the warmer climate.
They lived at the Miramar Hotel in Long Beach. He lived there in the wintertime.
He'd have his Cadillac shipped to California, and before he came back, he'd sell it there. And he'd already have an order with Humphrey Cadillac for a new Cadillac, so it was ready when he got back here.
While construction was coming to a close, a name contest was announced for Mr. Van Mater's new theater. Over 3,000 entries were received from 9 states. The judges decided on Coronado, with the name Normain as a close second. The winner of the contest was Lawrence Sandwick, who split the $300 prize with Harry Wolf, who came up with the slogan, Rockford's Wonder Theater. After years of planning and construction, the Coronado opened its doors on October 9, 1927. The palace premiered with the B.B. Daniels film, Swim, Girls, Swim. It is no surprise that the majority of the audience was gazing at this architectural dream world rather than at Ms. Daniels. Over 9,000 people filled the theater that first night. As word of the new palace spread, the theater began to form an identity under the watchful eye of manager Louis St. Pierre. To operate a grand movie palace, Mr. Van Mater needed a grand showman. District manager for all Rockford Enterprises Group theaters was Louis St. Pierre. St. Pierre was responsible for operations of the Coronado Theater from 1927, when the theater opened, until 1947. As a young man, St. Pierre was famous for his high-flying acrobatics and his magic shows.
When he was 16 years old, he used to dive backwards off of a 25-foot platform, do 2 somersaults, and land on a mattress in those days. But he never quit show business.
It was St. Pierre's duty to make sure that the Coronado Theater was packed every night, and to ensure that the ushers were in top form. St. Pierre's personal life was rather casual, but when it came to the business of running the theaters, St. Pierre was known for his strict attention to details.
The theater had to be run a certain way, and he had certain rules that he set down, and he just didn't do it any other way, and you always had to have your gloves clean for every performance. But they respected him because he was a very affable man. He was strict, but he liked them all, and they liked him.
Willard Van Mater was a quiet man who left the show business to Louis St. Pierre. Louis was so visible that sometimes patrons confused him as the owner.
I can't understand. The first time I heard somebody ask me or tell me that it was St. Pierre that was the owner, it floored me. I just couldn't understand. Now, Mr. Van Mater was there on every night. He was a good showman. In fact, St. Pierre was not only the manager of the Coronado, he was the district manager of all the theaters in Rockford that Mr. Van Mater owned. And he was good at it. I remember when I was an usher at the Midway, Citizen Kane was the picture that was going to be at the Midway. And St. Pierre come down and he decided that he was going to ballyhoo that movie, and he had another usher and myself dressed with a top hat and cape, and we were to walk down the street, and every once in a while we'd drop the lid on the suitcase, advertising Citizen Kane.
At the end of the evening, when the house lights went dark, the stars of stage and screen were invited to the St. Pierre's home for an after-hours jam session.
Somebody would come to town that he really liked, like the Marx Brothers. He'd invite him out to the house after the show was over. And people that he really admired would come, we'd be at the top of the stairway listening to everything that's going on downstairs. They were having a ball down there at night. And it was the first time I found out that Harpo could talk. I was young, and my sister was sitting next to me, and my brother. And our staircase went straight up and then it turned, so you could have a couple more stairs and we could sit up there. And I said, he talks. And she says, of course he talks, you dummy.
St. Pierre was also an inventor and a painter. For years, Louis' parrot painting hung outside his office. When he left it, it became the property of the Coronado, and now resides above the fireplace in the Van Mater apartment. St. Pierre's daughter, Joanne Estwing, has a replica of the painting.
I said, would you take a picture of that and paint it? Because they'll never take it down, Dad. And I don't know what happened to all his paintings that were in his office, because those were nice paintings. Somebody slipped out with those.
On May 31st, 1943, the musical We're Telling You put the Coronado Theater in the national spotlight once again by selling $175,000 worth of war bonds. This was the largest amount of war bonds ever sold in one day.
He sold more war bonds than any one man in the United States. Can you imagine that? Campaigning around the United States. He has it. My brother has the plaque from Roosevelt, President Roosevelt.
The Coronado was a cash business, and the threat of theft kept the employees on their guard. Louis St. Pierre came up with an ingenious suggestion.
The hole behind the safe was where the money was. He says, just leave the safe door open. Anybody try to come in, there's no money. And then my dad would take the money to the bank every night, so he became a deputy sheriff. And that was the only way we could get out of Las Vegas during the war one time. Because he was a deputy sheriff.
After over 20 years in the theater business, Louis St. Pierre suffered a heart attack. He then decided to part company with his beloved theater.
He was in bed for a long time, but that was his decision then. He made that decision that it's going to kill him. He used to run up those stairs 2 or 3 at a time, you know, all the time, the balcony stairs. And he was always running somewhere in this theater. And he saw too many people in the theater business who it really got the best of him. So he said, I'm going to take my 2 sons when they're out of the Army and go into business out in California.
The Coronado cost $1.5 million to build in 1927. It was by no means the most expensive of the grand movie palaces.
This genre, the American movie palace, is very uniquely American. It existed for a very short period of time.
In 1929, the stock market crashed. Even the wealthiest Americans were hit hard by the Depression, but the movies served as an escape from the harsh realities of everyday life.
I think the Depression didn't destroy the movies because for a while movie attendance remained quite high as people were seeking escapism by going to the movies. But it did mark the beginning of the end for the movie palaces, and movies became smaller and more decentralized.
The Depression ended this sort of folly. What were these people thinking? Who knows? You know, I got to think there was a little bit of the circus man in Mr. Van Mater. You know, was this his folly? I don't know. He continued to run a theater through the Depression, and until his death, actually, they were showing movies here. So, you know, I'd say hats off to him. I don't know what made him tick, but it's great, you know, it's a great thing he left for us.
Willard Van Mater, who worked his way up in his father's piano business, who led the Rockford Enterprises group to build the Coronado, a man who lost everything and swore never to be poor again, suffered a massive heart attack in July of 1952 and was admitted to Swedish American Hospital in Rockford.
Very dear Lauren, thank you so much for the gorgeous flowers you sent Mr. Van Meter. He was so pleased to be remembered and remarked how nice it was of you. I have them close to his bed so he can enjoy them. Today came the most promising news so far, and I feel more hopeful as each day makes his chances for recovery more certain. We can just pray hard to keep him. Most sincerely, Irma Van Meter.
Irma's prayers were answered on December 12th, when Mr. Van Meter was able to return home to the Coronado. 9 months after suffering the heart attack, the father of the Coronado was admitted to Rockford Memorial Hospital. On April 23, 1953, Willard Van Meter died, leaving his wife Irma to care for their only child, the Coronado Theater.
He was very fond of me, and I was very fond of him.
He's definitely a man of means and a man of vision, and someone that you probably didn't want to mess with.
They were both nice, and I don't know how wealthy they were, but they were certainly nice people. They were treated their help like they would their own children. And I can't think of anyone that was any nicer.
After the death of Willard Van Meter in 1953, his wife Irma took control of the theater. Throughout the 50s and the 60s, the theater business went through many changes. The multiplex was on the rise across the country, and the days of the 2,000-seat, single-screen movie palace were coming to a close. Irma Van Meter did everything possible to keep up with the ever-changing climate of the motion picture industry. On March 19, 1969, the Coronado Theater was orphaned when Mrs. Van Meter passed away. Irma's will stated that the theater should be sold, and as soon as the estate was settled, all proceeds were to be donated to various Rockford charities, including a generous donation to the Rockford Memorial Hospital as a memorial to Mr. Van Meter. The theater was sold to the Kerasotes Theater Company.
Anybody who thinks that Kerasotes gave that theater to the city out of their generous heart, they're foolish. Kerasotes gave that theater to the city because they didn't want to refurbish it and fix it up because it was going down grade. So, and it just irritates me when I see that Kerasotes on that Coronado upright sign. It just irritates me to no end. And I'm sure it irritates a lot of others.
Now, as time rolled on and the movie industry changed, in the 1970s, obviously movies changed quite a bit. We went from having these huge movie palaces to these little tiny multiplexes out at the mall. And businesses left downtown, street traffic left downtown, and unfortunately, this theater became very unwieldy. It had 2,400 seats and one screen, and it was very difficult to make money on this sort of proposition. Well, about that time, Mrs. Van Meter passed away. It was 1970, and for the first time, the ownership of the theater passed into another corporation, and that's when the Kerasotes Corporation bought the theater. When they actually purchased the building, they held this huge press conference saying that this was the pinnacle of their movie empire career. They were going to make the Coronado the showcase for all of their latest films. They were going to, you know, really use this as the centerpiece of their movie empire. And unfortunately, things didn't really work out that way. Plus, they had bought an old building, and the roof was leaking, and the heat didn't work. The air conditioning hadn't worked since like 1935. And they just had to put all this money into repairs, and they weren't bringing in very much in their box office receipts. And so eventually, in 1980, the Kerasotes folks actually closed the theater to movies. And from that point on, it was only used for live performances.
Well, it was put here on opening day by Dan Barton of the Barton Organ Company. It was originally the Bartola. Brought it down. It came down in 5 boxcars, weighed 27 tons. Most of what you see as the organ is actually up in the organ chambers, not down in the organ itself. It was the 6th largest organ that Barton Company built. 4 ranks. Organ. It had 23 pedals to it, 4 keyboards, made possibly 253,000 sounds if you used all 200 stops. I don't think anyone's ever been able to do that. It was used, in the beginning they tried to use recorded music, but that didn't work well because they'd be playing a Sousa march while they were having a funeral on the screen or something of the kind, which just didn't work out. So they went to orchestras, but orchestras were too expensive. So the organ came in for use in the theater. The first organs were, of course, straight organs. They looked very churchy. They sounded very churchy. And then the horseshoe organ was made. And they brought them in, and sometimes they'd use them with the orchestra. Sometimes it would just be the organ that would play. And they were used for sing-alongs because this was a vaudeville theater. Between acts, movies that have sing-alongs, and it was also used to accompany the silent films. And they would play chase scenes, and they would have quiet, and it has the bass drum and the ooga horn and the cymbals and the bird whistles and all the rest of it. And then as talkies came in more and more, the first partial talkie came to the Coronado a year after the theater opened. And the more the talkies came, the less the organ was used until it was silent for many, many years.
In 1962, the Grand Barton organ went through its first restoration. A group of theater organ enthusiasts spent 2 years restoring the organ and held a rededication concert in 1964. In 1973, the Land of Lincoln Theater Organ Society was formed and accepted responsibility for maintaining the Grand Barton organ. With the Kerasotes Theater Company unable or unwilling to bear the cost of maintaining the historic movie palace, the Land of Lincoln Theater Organ Society took it upon themselves to become the primary caretakers of the theater, cleaning and doing small restoration projects, while creating an archive and preserving the history of the organ's home.
Our organ club supported and took care of this theater for at least 15 years. If it wasn't for our club, this theater would not be open.
Laltos continued doing what they could until the theater was donated to the city and the multi-million-dollar restoration was financed by the generous donations procured by the Friends of the Coronado. Laltos is still greatly involved in the theater, serving as tour guides, planning organ concerts, and other events that promote both the organ and the theater itself.
Theater organ it's something like you get bitten by a bug, and once you have the theater organ bug, it's incurable.
I always felt that the theater, instead of it being given to the city, it would have been nicer if it had been given to the Organ Society, because the Organ Society had been taking care of the organ and a lot of things in that theater, even when this new group took it over. And it was a shame that it wasn't given to them. I think they'd have done a better job.
My husband and I were involved in the very, very beginning. We were part of the Rockford Area Arts Council originally. We were incubated in that organization, and it was when the theater was gifted to the city that we became a full-fledged organization on our own, and we continued in the leadership through the completion of the project.
In 1987, the Actors Equity Association blacklisted the Coronado Theater for having inadequate and unsafe facilities. In 1994, the Rockford Area Arts Council performed a needs assessment for local arts organizations. This assessment led to a detailed feasibility study, which would eventually lead to the renovation of the Coronado Theater. In November of 1997, the Carasotes Theater Company donated the Coronado Theater to the city of Rockford. Immediately following the donation, Rockford Mayor Charles Box appointed Mary Ann and C. Gordon Smith to chair the Friends of the Coronado organization.
The Friends of the Coronado was created in 1997 in November when the gift of the theater was presented to the city of Rockford. I personally have been involved with Coronado since I was a child. I came here for cartoons and for concerts early on, and I continued in the role as president of the community concerts, and it was there that I really, my awareness was raised about not only the fabulousness of this theater, but also the potential doom in letting this theater go without some serious maintenance. And these projects in any community represent an enormous amount of emotional, human experience, you know, of high emotions, labors of love. I worked on this project with my husband, my late husband. We were partners. We were very equal partners. And so the fact that he became ill during this long journey, remember, this is a project I've been working on for over 10 years. And so life continues, and we had lots of crises, not only in our personal lives, but in the journey to resurrect the theater.
In order for the performing arts organizations here in Rockford to continue to thrive and have audiences, we didn't want the Coronado to be closed for very long. So we knew it was going to be pushing it, but we decided 18 months was all you got. And we'd have regular updates every 2 weeks. How are we doing? Are we on schedule? What are we doing now? What's going to happen? And everyone was very nervous too, because working on an old building, you never know what you're going to find. You knock down a wall and all of a sudden you run into a lot of asbestos. Well, miraculously enough, things really did stay on time right up until about the end of November, and we were supposed to open in January. We had sort of scheduled that the building would be finished by the end of December, giving us 2 or 3 weeks cushion. Well, as I guess usually happens, we were working right up until half an hour before the doors opened for the first big event, our huge gala event. And then there were some sort of stupid screw-ups that happened. The architects specified a certain kind of flooring for the stage floor. The contractors got a different kind of flooring and put it on the stage floor. Both kinds were wrong. The curtain came and it was made to the wrong specifications. They hung it and they looked at it and went, oh my God. There's this huge table downstairs that has this marble top. It's gorgeous. It's been here since 1927. And as the workmen were bringing this piece of marble into the building, they were like 10 feet away from the table, and one of them moved suddenly, and the damn thing broke in half. The elevator that I was so proud of that could transport all of our elderly patrons up to the 3rd floor broke. The day of the gala, the bathrooms weren't working. Some of the toilets overflowed, I think. People are in minks and long gowns. This is not what they want to see with their $18.5 million theater. Our caterer from Chicago came, set everything up. We had this marvelous buffet meal for 1,300 people that he was frantically whipping up in the backstage area, and plugged in all of his little appliances and shorted out the whole building. The fire alarms keep going off, and we're like, what's that? And they get reset. Oh, something's wrong with the mechanism. Oh, we'll fix that. And finally, the fire alarms went off once, and they didn't go, just turn themselves off. The fire department arrived. They've got axes. They're all, you know, suited up. I'm thinking, oh my God, the place is on fire. This is terrible. The marquee on the front of the building was installed incorrectly. The day of the grand opening, some of our board members who were actually working for the city at the time were seriously up in the upper balcony with vacuum cleaners because there was crap everywhere. I mean, there's plaster dust and, you know, screws. There's like, you know, nails here and there that people just haven't managed to pick up, so we're going through trying to, you know, push things under the rug and hope that nobody notices and clean things up as much as possible. Everything came down to the wire. You know, we had people who were trying to do the electrical installation. They were trying to do the decorative painting. They were, you know, they couldn't put the carpeting down until all of the plaster was finished, and so you had, you know, spots where things looked like they'd never get done in time.
On January 20th, 2001, the Coronado Theater held its grand reopening gala for 1,300 people. After 18 months of renovation, the Friends of the Coronado succeeded in making the Coronado Theater a venue for all of Rockford to use and share. The renovated theater includes expanded and remodeled dressing rooms, a rehearsal hall for the Rockford Symphony, an expanded lobby, and a reception area for guests of the theater. Today, the Coronado Theater faces many challenges. While the theater continues to play host to touring Broadway shows, rock concerts, and symphony performances, critics of the theater cite high ticket prices, high rental fees, enormous overhead, and poor scheduling. The project was initiated so that all of Rockford's citizens could enjoy the majestic beauty of the theater. Despite the Friends of the Coronado's promise that the theater would be for all to use and share, the average citizen cannot afford more than a free tour.
Intuition tells me that just as you build a massive baseball stadium or a dome stadium to attract fans and improve your finances, that people come to see a magnificent building, whether it's a baseball stadium or a movie palace, only for a year or two, and then what goes on in the stadium or in the movie palace becomes more important, the quality of the entertainment rather than the quality of the building. And as time goes on, the building becomes less relevant, at least less relevant to everyone but the elite.
What we have now is a facility in Rockford that can be competitive with any market of this size and even with some larger markets. And we now have all the resources here, and we need to now make this theater work every possible moment it can for this community, for the citizens, for the economy, for the development, for all the reasons. And I'm excited that we have new leadership at the Metro Center. This facility is operated by the Rockford Metro Center, by Center Events. And so now we have to work together, the Friends, in the goal of meeting our goal of outreach and education and our mission of high preservation standards for this theater, and we need to work together with Center Events as they move forward to operate and program, and we hope to be a partner with the Center Events every step of the way.
I hope and I pray that new management here will actually take the time not to move something from somewhere else, but to understand the Rockford market. I mean, I feel I understand it, but it's so vast. I mean, I've been doing out of the college for 18 years, and I kind of say, okay, well, they'll go with me on this one, but they won't go with me on that one. But somebody needs to have that kind of sensibility to make this place work, or any place work.
I really am optimistic to the future. The first year has been a little, I wouldn't say hard, but everybody's trying to establish their role, and we were kind of the forerunner during the fundraising, and now we need to have, I think, a little bit better partnership. We're optimistic with new management at the theater that we will be there to be their cheerleader, if you will, and to support the theater, have the interest of the theater go up, and support them in any of their programming that they do.
While the Coronado Theater has been fortunate enough to rebuild its legacy, thousands of other movie palaces have fallen by the wayside. Today there are fewer than 300 movie palaces left in the United States in various conditions. As individuals, fortunate enough to have witnessed the architecture of fantasy, it is up to each and every one of us to ensure that future generations may too enjoy the great American escape.